my name is Rachel Williams and I'm a survivor of domestic abuse and violence. I was in a violent relationship for 18 years, which resulted in an attempted murder on my life. And sadly, my 16-year-old son taking his life because of his father's actions. So since then, I've become very active in the domestic abuse arena and campaigning for change where change is needed, and also bringing that victim, authentic, unmediated voice to the table.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll ask you the title of the panel that you're going to be on. Why do we need to talk more about domestic violence, in your view?
Well, I don't think that we talk about it enough. I think, I can honestly say, during the 10 years that I've been active in the arena, things have progressed, and I think there has been certain changes which have really sort of given the victims and survivors that, like, oh yeah, things are on the move. But to be totally honest with you, I feel some days that we're stepping forward 2 steps and stepping back 3 steps. And I think, to be totally honest with you, our government is not really taking domestic abuse seriously as it should be. And our criminal justice system is so broken. It just needs a massive overhaul when it's dealing with perpetrators.
What are the problems there? Is it to do with proof? Is it police being able to gather evidence? Is it court backlogs that leave people in very dangerous situations for long periods of time? Is it a combination of all these things and many others that I've probably not thought of?
I think it's probably a combination of everything, and I can honestly say, literally in the last 2 years, I have had sort of like a revelation. I lived it for 18 years. I've been working as a professional for the last 10 years, and I can say domestic abuse is so complex. And I think if those professionals who don't have the tools in the box to deal with victims and survivors with that knowledge, I think so much is missed and dropped, and and it's not seen in the severity as it should be seen. And I think so we need to be fully training police officers, prosecutors. They need to know the ins and outs of domestic abuse when they've got that statement. And we also got to look when we're giving those statements and reports to the court, that they are written in a language that should be able to really highlight the severities and the implications and the complexities of domestic abuse and violence. So, language plays a big part in it as well. And then I think when it does get to the court system, you've got lay magistrates sat behind the bench, and there's, and I'm not poo-pooing magistrates, but when you've got somebody who's lived in a village for the last 50 years, worked as a librarian, nothing against librarians, but I'm just giving you a sort of general view. Somebody wants to fill their time as a magistrate because they're now bored and got nothing to do, but never had anything happen to them where they've had to call the police, even attempted breaking of a car, a mugging, anything like that. How can they possibly understand when that perpetrator is in court pleading and crying and saying they're going to change? How can they actually understand that this is all a mask, and what the victim has actually really gone through? So I think, all those that are in the system, the criminal justice system, need to be fully, robustly trained to the best that they can be, so they can see through the perpetrators in court. And then looking at the jury as well, you've got people on the jury that really don't understand domestic abuse, and they fall for the defence, and a defence puts up a good argument, and they're like, well, don't know, he said he was only once and he snapped and this, that and the other. No, and I do feel that jury's members should also be semi-professional in the domestic abuse world.
Yeah, interesting. And this, I read this statistic that 1 in 5 adults experience domestic abuse in their lifetime, and I thought, I sat with that for a moment, and I thought, oh my God, that's a much bigger statistic than I would have guessed at, as someone who likes to think that I'm kind of engaged in serious issues, or like to think about these things. But do you think the public understand to what extent this is a problem?
No, I don't think the public really do understand. I mean, those that have lived it and breathed it, and maybe those who are passionate and work, as an advocate support worker, they will understand it. But to be honest with you, I don't think it's 1 in 5. I think it's probably more likely to be 1 in 3.
Wow. So, and even a bigger problem than any of us are aware of, when we were probably not aware of how big it was according to the official statistics.
Yeah. I mean, when you think that all the police forces, they will get a call, every 30 seconds, a domestic abuse related call will go into a police force every 30 seconds.
What was it that drove you from your personal lived experience, which is just something that not many of us would be able to, compute, be able to deal with in any way. But you took your personal lived experience and you turned it into this sort of, campaign for public change, this public advocacy. What do you think drove you to be able to do that?
Well, when I had the IOPC report, which it was called then, the Independent Office for Police Complaints report, hand delivered, and my serious case review, when I read through it through sort of, through a sort of tinted glass, first of all, because I'm thinking, those professionals would have done the best job ever, even though I knew that they weren't at the time, but I wasn't sure what sort of role they sort of should have been playing, and I seen basically what a shower of it was, the whole of the 6 weeks when I left my perpetrator to the day of the shooting. I mean, I had 34 police officers involved in my case in 6 weeks. So you can imagine the frustration when all of a sudden I called the police officer for something, whether it was a breach of my perpetrator's bail terms, and then I get a police officer out, and then I give a statement, and then I phone the next day for an update, and that police officer's now gone on rest days for 4 days. So then I've got to relay everything back to a fresh copper who knows nothing about the case, and then they'll try and find an update, and then I'll ring in a couple of days for an update back, and they're all real rubbish at updating. All the police forces are rubbish at updating the victims. When you're anxious and you're on edge waiting for some feedback, even if they said there's nothing to feedback, we're working behind the scenes gathering evidence, but you're left in limbo, and then you phone that police officer, the one that you spoke to 2 days ago, and now they've gone on rest days or they're on nights, and they'll give you a call the following day and you don't get that call. So it is so frustrating. This is not good enough. This is not a service that is a good service that is really supporting and delivering well to victims and survivors of abuse, hence why I became so active and vocal in the domestic abuse arena.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. I think we've got sort of plenty on why you're working on what you're working on. If I can ask you about the festival and being involved in the Leeds International Festival of Ideas.
When I had an email from the Leeds International Festival for Ideas, and they wanted to talk and bring domestic abuse out into the forum, that is music to my ears, because, I think the more platforms we can talk about domestic abuse and violence and coercive control on, the better, because then the public will have, hopefully, some level of understanding, why, that question, why victims why didn't you just leave? If it was as easy as that, victims would have left a long time ago, but it's not as easy as that. And I think it's then giving that having that platform and being able to talk to the audience, and hopefully they'll leave with a greater respect and knowledge of domestic abuse.
And why do you think it's important to have those discussions in person, in real life, rather than obviously there's a lot of discussion online and a lot of discussion on social media, but having people in a room and having that discussion, why is that important, do you think?
I think it's important in person because it's more personal and it's more personable. And I think, when people are in the audience, and I get this quite a lot because I do a lot of police training and CPS and everything else like that, and NHS. And I think if somebody doesn't know, for instance, my backstory, and they see somebody that's presented well, fairly articulate, I'd like to say, and then all of a sudden I give them my backstory, and then you can basically hear a pin drop, and then you can see the jaws on the floor. And it's like, well, what does a typical victim of domestic abuse and violence have to look like? You know, and I think there's such this stigma around where it's that you know, lower demographic, that woman who is in the house, you know, with a load of children, you know, doesn't work. And that is sort of the image that some people have got in their head. You know, they're stigmatizing, you know, the victims and survivors. We come in all shapes and sizes, and just like perpetrators of abuse, they will be lurking in every corner, every aspect of life. Police forces, you know, prosecutors, social workers, road sweepers, bartenders, you know, judges, magistrates. They're in all walks of life, you know, and that is addressing, I suppose, the elephant in the room, which some people feel uncomfortable with. I clearly don't, because as I said, you know, I've seen it and lived it and breathed it. So I think it's having those open and honest conversations with an unmediated voice. You'll get the truth out, because people want to hear the truth.